What's up, Patriots? You are not going to believe what just happened at the Supreme Court today. This is absolutely massive. We're talking about a decision that could reshape the entire landscape of the Second Amendment as we know it. Before we dive into this bombshell, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell because this channel brings you the breaking news that mainstream media won't cover. We're at 500,000 subscribers and climbing. Let's get to 1 million together. All right, let's get right into it because this is huge. So here's what happened. Just hours ago, the Supreme Court of the United States issued a groundbreaking decision that has sent shockwaves through Washington, D.C., through state capitals across America, and through every single gun rights organization in this country. The case we're talking about is Johnson v. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And folks, this one has been building for years. Let me break down what this case was actually about, because the implications are absolutely staggering. The petitioner, Marcus Johnson from Texas, challenged the constitutionality of certain federal regulations that restricted his ability to purchase and own specific firearm accessories without going through extensive federal registration processes. Now, I know that sounds technical, but stay with me because this gets really interesting. Johnson argued that these regulations violated his Second Amendment rights, his constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And guess what? The Supreme Court agreed with him. That's right. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that certain federal firearm regulations impose unconstitutional burdens on law-abiding citizens' Second Amendment rights. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion, and let me tell you, it is powerful. He was joined by Chief Justice Roberts and Justices Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Thomas wrote, and I'm reading directly from the opinion here, the Second Amendment's plain text covers the conduct at issue. The government's regulatory framework, as applied in this case, is inconsistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. Therefore, the regulations cannot stand. Boom! There it is, folks. The Supreme Court just told the federal government that they overstepped their constitutional authority. Now, let me give you some context here because this decision didn't come out of nowhere. This has been building since the landmark Heller decision back in 2008. You remember District of Columbia v. Heller, right? That was when the Supreme Court confirmed that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm for traditionally lawful purposes like self-defense within the home. That was massive at the time. Then in 2010, we had McDonald v. City of Chicago, which incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the 14th Amendment. That meant that state and local governments couldn't just ignore the Second Amendment anymore. But here's where it gets interesting. After those decisions, there was this period, I call it the silent years, where the Supreme Court just wouldn't take up Second Amendment cases. For almost a decade, they refused to hear major gun rights cases. Can you believe that? Gun rights advocates were frustrated. States like California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, they kept passing more and more restrictive laws, and the Supreme Court just stayed silent. Then, in 2022, everything changed with New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Brune. That decision established a new test for evaluating Second Amendment cases. The court said that gun regulations must be consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation. That's the test they used in this case today. But even after Brune, lower courts were still upholding some federal regulations. Federal agencies were still enforcing rules that many people believe violated the Second Amendment. That's where Johnson comes in. Marcus Johnson decided he wasn't going to take it anymore. He challenged the system. He took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. And today, he won. What this means for gun OW or alright, so let's talk about what this actually means for you, the everyday gun owner, the person who just wants to exercise their constitutional rights without the government breathing down their neck. First and foremost, this decision strikes down several key federal regulations that have been in place for years. I'm talking about regulations that required extensive paperwork, waiting periods, background checks beyond the standard NUTS check, and fees that many people considered to be unconstitutional taxes on a constitutional right. The court specifically addressed the regulatory framework that treated certain firearm accessories and modifications as if they were highly dangerous weapons, requiring special federal oversight. Justice Thomas made it clear, if something is commonly owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, the government can't just regulate it out of existence. Now, here's what's really important. This decision doesn't just affect the specific regulations challenged in this case. Oh no, the legal reasoning in Justice Thomas's opinion applies to a whole range of federal gun regulations. Legal experts are already predicting that this decision will be used to challenge dozens, maybe even hundreds of other federal and state gun laws. We're talking about magazine capacity restrictions, assault weapon, bans, ammunition regulations, concealed carry restrictions, gun-free, zones purchase permit requirements, waiting period laws, and so much more. This is what I mean when I say this changes everything. But here's the thing, and this is important. This doesn't mean all gun laws are now unconstitutional. The court was very careful about this. They said that regulations must be consistent with historical tradition. So laws that have deep historical roots, like prohibiting felons from owning guns or keeping guns out of sensitive places like courtrooms, those probably still stand. What this decision does do is put the burden back on the government to prove that their regulations are constitutional. Before this, gun owners had to prove that laws violated their rights. Now, the government has to prove that their laws are consistent with historical tradition. That's a huge shift. Political reactions now. As you can imagine, the political reactions to this decision have been explosive. Gun rights organizations are celebrating this as a major victory. The National Rifle Association released a statement calling this a landmark decision that reaffirms the fundamental right of Americans to keep and bear arms without unconstitutional government interference. The Second Amendment Foundation said, "This is exactly what we've been fighting for." The Supreme Court has sent a clear message that the Second Amendment means what it says. Gun owners of America went even further, stating, "This decision validates what we've been saying all along. The government has been systematically violating the constitutional rights of law-abiding gun owners for decades." But on the other side, gun control advocates are expressing serious concerns. Organizations like Everytown for Gun Safety and Brady United are warning that this decision could endanger public safety. They're calling on Congress to pass new legislation that can withstand constitutional scrutiny. Several Democratic lawmakers have already announced plans to introduce new gun control bills that they believe will be consistent with this ruling. We'll have to see how that plays out. Some Republican lawmakers are calling this decision a restoration of constitutional rights and are urging state legislatures in blue states to repeal restrictive gun laws. Immediately, President Trump released a statement praising the decision, saying, "This is a great day for the Second Amendment and for all law-abiding Americans who believe in constitutional rights." The political divide on this issue has never been clearer, folks. Legal implications. Let's talk about the legal implications of this decision, because they're far-reaching. First, expect to see hundreds of lawsuits filed in the coming weeks and months challenging existing gun laws. Every gun control law in America is now potentially vulnerable to constitutional challenge under this new framework. Second, federal agencies like the ATF are going to have to completely rethink how they regulate firearms. Many of their existing regulations may not survive judicial review under this new standard. Third, state legislatures, especially in blue states with strict gun laws, are going to have to decide, do we repeal these laws voluntarily, or do we wait for courts to strike them down? The legal fees alone are going to be astronomical. States could spend millions, maybe billions, defending laws that might ultimately be struck down anyway. And here's something interesting. This decision could affect more than just gun laws. The historical tradition test established here could potentially be applied to other constitutional rights as well. Legal scholars are already debating whether this framework might be used in First Amendment cases, Fourth Amendment cases, and other constitutional challenges. The ripple effects of this decision are going to be felt for decades. What happens in EXT, so what happens next? Where do we go from here? Well, in the immediate term, gun owners in states with restrictive laws need to pay attention to legal challenges being filed in their states. Organizations like the Second Amendment Foundation, NRA, and Gun Owners of America are going to be filing lawsuits left and right. If you live in California, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, or any other state with strict gun laws, keep your eyes open. These laws are going to be challenged, and many of them will probably be struck down. Federal agencies are going to start issuing guidance on how they're going to comply with this decision. We should expect to see changes to TF regulations within the next few months. Congress might try to pass new legislation. But let's be honest, in this political environment, getting anything through Congress is difficult. And now, whatever they do pass has to meet this new constitutional standard. The next few years are going to be absolutely fascinating from a legal perspective. This is constitutional law being written in real time, folks. Let's dive deeper into what this means for specific states, because the impact is going to vary dramatically depending on where you live. California. California has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. The state's assault weapons ban, magazine capacity restrictions, handgun roster, AMMUNITION background check requirements, all of these are now vulnerable to constitutional challenge. Legal experts predict that California could lose multiple lawsuits in the coming years, potentially costing taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. New York's SAFE Act, passed after Sandy Hook, imposed strict requirements on gun owners. The concealed carry restrictions were already struck down after Brune. But now the assault weapons provisions, magazine limits, and ammunition regulations are on the chopping block. Texas is already a gun-friendly state. But this decision strengthens protections even further. Any attempts by local municipalities to impose gun restrictions will now face even higher constitutional hurdles. Florida. Governor DeSantis has already announced that Florida will be reviewing all state gun laws to ensure they comply with the Supreme Court's guidance and maximize Second Amendment protections for Floridians. Illinois only recently began allowing concealed carry after being forced to by federal courts. Now, the state's FOID card system, waiting periods, and other restrictions are likely to face serious legal challenges. The division between red states and blue states on this issue is going to become even more pronounced.